Mark, you have my apologies. Right here. Let me kill this and bring my man on. Mark, you have my deepest apologies. I thought I sent you that link. Apparently, I just sent you the first line. Said, hey, the link is below. And then I lied because there was nothing below. Welcome to
Issues happen.
Yeah, it happens. How you doing, man? You doing okay today?
Yeah, I'm alive. How are you, Jamar?
I am also alive. I'm doing well. I can't complain. Obviously, KURSK has been liberated. I would imagine there were other parts on the battlefield that were also liberated over the course of the last week. I don't think we've talked about it over the week. So can we dip into that for a minute? What is the significance of KURSK being liberated, short of radical humiliation, 70,000 people dying, loads of equipment being blown up? Is there a larger significance to KURSK being liberated?
Okay, so first of all, Jamar, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show.
Always.
So yes, Putin joined Gerasimov, the head of the Russian military, also the head of the special military operation, the equivalent of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, in a televised presentation where part of the briefing that Gerasimov gave Trump was televised. And in that briefing, he informed Putin that the all of the populated centers of the Kursk region and the Belgorod region, which actually no populated centers had ever been fully taken, but had been liberated by joint Russian and North Korean forces, right? And so, first of all, mea culpa. I and pretty much that everyone else in the alt media space, not that that's an excuse, have been dismissing claims of North Korean troops fighting alongside Russian troops in the Kursk region for months now. And to my defense, I saw no credible evidence that they were really there. Nothing that was presented by the Kiev regime. They're the fake Koreans that they captured. Evidently, they never really captured any Koreans. They were Russian Buryat or other ethnics who happened to look Asian, not really North Korean, but close enough. And although the U.S. harped on about this, I was under the assumption that it was part of the Kiev regime propaganda, like the Ghost of Kiev or the Snake Island hoax, or the Russians attacked the Crimean Bridge and Nord Stream and any number of other things.
Yeah.
And one of my assumptions was that although Russian media, Russian big media, Russian state media, Russian corporate media wouldn't report it if the Russian government was trying to keep it quiet, was that, however, there are an awful lot of Russian war journalists, war bloggers on Telegram and else out there who are all along behind the front lines. That I follow a number of them. I know a number of them personally, right? To at least at a degree that I had thought that it would be impossible to keep something like that quiet, right? And they did. And they did. And a number of people that I know said, yeah, sorry, I couldn't tell you. We were asked and I couldn't tell you. And then pictures of these war journalists with North Korean troops showed up on the internet. And I'm like, thanks, assholes. I got egg on my face, right? You know, I've been saying I see North Korean people for months now. Now, let me make it perfectly clear. I don't care. Right? I mean, I've said this multiple times. If North Koreans were fighting alongside Russian troops, we've got thousands and thousands of Western quote unquote mercenaries, specialists, experts, and anything. And this was even in Russian territory, which this Kursk Fool's Crusade.
Mhm.
So, but nonetheless, I was surprised, and it does raise an element of personal doubt, right? If I and others that I trust were wrong on this, surely there's some other things that we're wrong about,
Of
right?
course.
And
You're a
that
person.
has to be factored in. Now, I still think overall, 90% of what the Kiev regime puts out is complete bunk, and that on to the contrary, 80% of what the Russian government puts out is honest, right? I say 80. I don't. It's not 100. And I've always said the way that the Russian government lies is by omission. And that's what they did. The Russian government never denied that there were North Korean troops there.
Right.
And in retrospect, maybe we should have been paying closer attention to that.
Like, that's weird by itself, right? They didn't confirm or deny. They didn't just say anything.
So that is something we should check. So we haven't had an exact number, right? So we might as well use the numbers that the West have been using on this, somewhere between 8,000 and 12,000 seems likely. By all Russian accounts, they fought with professionalism and courage. Mm-hmm. If a degree of ideological zeal that at times disturbed the Russian soldiers a little bit in their willingness, their eagerness to volunteer for actions that the Russians found suicidal and said, no, you're not going to do that, right? Yeah. But evidently the language problems and interoperability was a problem that was overcome very quickly. The North Korean troops were evidently killing themselves in the rare situations where they faced capture, right? The standard of pulling a grenade or something of the sort that is a hallmark of Western movies, and it's heroic when Western heroes do it, and of course it's a sign of insanity and ideological dogma when or brainwashing when say North Korean soldiers would do it. But they were given credit for providing a assistance in several key locations. And I think we have to come back to a previous New York Times article now that had discussed this and put out a what they presented as insider information, that it wasn't that Russia requested that North Korean troops fight according to the terms of their new treaty. It was that North Korea volunteered their troops because they wanted to gain what is extremely valuable combat experience in a peer-on-peer conflict with, drones and electronic warfare and these other elements playing such a key instance that, essentially no full militaries other than Russia and the Kiev regime in Ukraine have battlefield experience with right now. So that itself is a very valuable learning experience. But it's also an indication that we can expect Russian and North Korean troops to fight together in the future. And if there ever is an invasion of North Korea, Russia will now be treaty and honor bound. Will be treaty bound to provide some form of assistance. And I would argue they would be honor bound to provide troops, right? Since North Korea did as well. Not that I see any U.S. ground invasion of North Korea to be something likely into the future. Now, the Kiev regime, interlocutors on the internet are all, they're still fighting in Kursk and Belgorod. And you have to go back to the exact statements that were made. All populated centers have been liberated. There are still a few tree lines and trenches, evidently right on the border in not only the Kursk region but the Belgorod region as well, where there, as of at least I would say 24 hours ago, there was still some fighting going on, whether that's true or not, but they had been ejected from any population center, and at this point it's semantic, right? So what are the implications of this? Well, first of all, the Kiev regime invested so much political capital, whatever the original goal was, right? And they've tossed out so many versions, right? And there usually is more than one reason why you do these things. They've never fully admitted that they attempted to seize the Kursk nuclear power plant and potential tactical nuclear weapons that were held nearby in the town just outside the Kursk nuclear power plant. But there have been several Kiev regime officials who have hinted enough at that we can understand that was one goal. After that, there has also been the suggestion that they were preventing a Russian attack from that direction. Well, maybe they were up until now, but now that's coming. Right? Russia's forces are going across the border here into Sumy, from both the Kursk region and from the Belgorod region. Putin has declared the setting up of a buffer zone, and it must be noted that if the regional capital of Sumy is taken, as it was briefly in 2022, then the road to Kiev is right open, and certainly the Kiev regime is worried about that. Maybe those 70,000 dead and wounded and all of the Western military equipment, and by some Kiev regime accounts, they lost more Western equipment in the Kursk Fool's Crusade than they did during the failed 2023 NATO planned offensive in the south, in Zaporozhye towards the Sea of Azov. So that is a significant amount of military gear, which is why Russia was happy to let the Kursk incursion continue for a time as a firebag, where all of this invaluable, or largely irreplaceable Western military equipment was led out into the effective open, right? Not in fortified defensive lines and trenches where it might have been better use. So Zelensky put so much personal political capital on this. Even as of the last few days, he has appeared, right, speaking to the captive Ukrainian people again, that this was a great victory of Ukraine. He showed us where he has a painting outside of his office of Ukrainian forces heroically seizing Russian land. Of course, he doesn't have them, dying, and being driven out, defeated in humiliation. And that's right across the side from his fantasy painting of the burning Kremlin in Moscow as well, showing clearly the mentality of this delusional emperor with no clothes. But he's lost, significant political capital. He repeatedly claimed that he was going to trade this seized Russian territory for Ukrainian territory, which was always a joke. Russia was never going to do that because they had the ability to take this back, right? And they had no reason to trade anything for it when they could take it back, which is what they did. And yeah, certainly there was a cost to it, but I think the numbers of the Kiev regime dead and wounded, or Kiev regime casualties in manpower and equipment will, in the future, show how lopsided and how much of a waste, particularly a strategic waste, but also a supply and logistics waste that this was. Think about it. The Kiev regime had to maintain supply lines under assault from Russian air power, from Russian artillery, from Russian drones in a considerable stretch on very poor, bad backwoods roads, because this was a backwoods, relatively unpopulated region. And maintaining supplies and logistics along that is extremely difficult, and there are costs and a war of attrition. Logistics. Amateurs study, tactics, study strategy, and experts study logistics, is the old rubric of military studies that has a lot of weight, has that statement, that point of view has a lot of merit to it. And that's certainly part of what we saw out. And Sujo was strangled, right? Supply and logistics wise, no matter how many reinforcements were thrown in there, well before the much publicized Operation Pipeline achieved some tactical surprise on the defensive positions there. So, loss of supplies, manpower in an attrition war that the Kiev war regime couldn't afford. Huge political capital loss for Zelensky personally, whom made a very big personal deal out of this. Also, now Russian forces, very large forces assembled in the Kursk and the Belgorod region, are assembled to move into Kiev regime territory for the north, and they've already beaten the Kiev regime forces remaining on the other side before. So they've opened up the lion into their home here, or the bear, if you want to think of it in more appropriate allegorical terms. And the Russian forces are coming. That's not a question. In fact, there has even been in the past week that we have seen a new structural division of what had been the operational group North, Sever, and it has been split. And so we still have a Sever, but there has been declared a new Kursk operational group.
Battle group.
So that will that I think clearly indicates that the Russian Ministry of Defense has designs definitely to continue on into Sumy at the very least, and perhaps further. And there is all of this noise that a little bit further to the west, that Russian forces have been gathering for the last few weeks to the west of Kursk, west area of the Kursk region, and into the Bryansk region, to go into the Chernigov region, which is Sumy is in the north center of the borderline, right? And then Kharkov is to the east. Then to the west of that is Chernigov, and then Chernigov then is right on the Dnieper River, up further up there. And if Russia does have designs on seizing the entire Russian side of the Dnieper River, then Chernigov and Sumy by default fall into that as well. So look for Russian moves not only into Sumy region, not only into Kharkov region, where Russian forces have reactivated there in the last few weeks, but also into the Chernigov region as well, all across the northern border between the two countries. And again, Russia has, besides strategic objectives, Russia has the goal of widening the contact line to spread the Kiev regime forces, which are already suffering from extreme manpower shortage, out as thin as possible along that contact line. So, if the Kiev regime doesn't send forces to reinforce, then Russia may decide to take another look at a deep dive, right? Otherwise, it will be engagement and the grinding war of attrition and, improvement of positions. as is the constant rollback of the Kiev regime forces. But it's also important to me when I look at the words that Putin and Gerasimov used to describe the taking of Ukrainian settlements in the Sumy region, they used the term liberated, which indicates that they definitely have designs, and we can maybe one day expect a referendum being held in Sumy and a Sumy National Republic being formed as well.
So, this is the Arestovich thing, right? Yeah. It's like right now it's going to be 4, and next week it's going to be 6, in a few months it's going to be 8. Wow. Let me ask you this. So effectively, the military that was built up in order to repel the invasion in the Kursk is now a formation that can move forward and effectively keep going.
Offensive, yes.
And the 70,000 that had invaded prior no longer exists.
Well,
to defend the territory.
Some number of those that are wounded will have been returned to combat, right? Depending on how the Russian military does their numbers. I don't know whether they're counting in that as the wounded as irretrievably wounded or all wounded, right? Mm-hmm. But yeah, a large percentage of that 70+ thousand, is now, no longer with us.
Wow, that is, oh God, that is a disaster.
Fool's Crusade. I hope they enjoyed all those Western headlines starting in last August. Putin humiliated as blah, 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 as Ukrainian troops fact a barely defended backwoods border, with their best troops and equipment. Oh, we achieved this great victory of defeating some border guards and young men doing their 1 year of national service. Well, and they humiliated Putin. Well, I hope that humiliation tasted good. How does it taste now, guys? How does humiliation taste now? I would ask the editors in the Western media who wrote those headlines back in August. How does that crow taste? And I say that, forgive me, crows, right? In my background. I don't really mean it. No one's eating you. Don't worry.
Does this have political consequences for Zelensky at home?
There's no politics as normal in the Kiev regime, of course, right? There's no elections. There's no real opposition parties. There are quote unquote opposition parties within the Maidan regime, like the Poroshenko's European Solidarity Party, but even those have been rendered effectively toothless. The only politics that matters in the Kiev regime is the support of primarily the United States, to a lesser extent Europe. And if there was a time for Zelensky to be removed sometime in the last 2 years, that has passed, right? He has neutered Zelensky as political opponents. Right now, there just is not it would be a very inopportune time to, affect some type of coup or political change to put someone in there now. Kiev regime forces are too back-footed at the moment. Trump is making too big a deal out of his, I believe, ill-fated attempts to get a ceasefire or a negotiated settlement. Maybe the chance of replacing Zelensky will emerge at some time in the future. I would think that it would be more likely for Russia to do it at some point in the future rather than the United States. But still, right now, it is the United States that is keeping Zelensky in